deployed and destroyed. This occurred about 20 years ago, and I'm over it, but I thought I'd share to see if you had any thoughts or had comparable experiences. I never had a good marriage with my first wife, and there were a number of warning signals that I ignored at first since I had no real experience dealing with older women. At the time, I was 23 and she was 28. To cut a long story short, I enlisted in the military after 9/11 because I thought we were headed to war and that I would be deployed. My wife and I fought a lot at this time because she wanted to relocate, and I reminded her that it's not up to me where we go. I'm Uncle Sam's property until my tour is done. Needless to say, orders came down shortly after we were stationed at Riley that we would be deploying to Iraq, despite the fact that we had several times over the following few weeks. It was almost like when we first met, so I certainly didn't believe anything was wrong. Fast forward to deployment day, and as you may expect, we're both a shambles. I'll save you the tedious details of the flight over since there isn't much to say. We landed in Kuwait, and I was assigned to 2-34 armor, big boy stuff. We were entrusted with securing several places for rebuilding and reuse, but I can't go into any more detail. I was deployed for 3 months before we had a post set up enough to receive mail and make phone calls home using a satellite phone. The first few times I phoned, there was no response. Then mail began to pour for everyone, except me. Care packages from family members arrived once a week, and every week I hoped for a letter or anything from home, but nothing arrived and no phone calls were returned. It came to the point where other troops were contributing items to me since I was the only one with a normal TA-50. 9 months later, no letters, parcels, or phone calls from my wife, and I was psychologically not in a good place. Where I was a very awful place. That's all I'm going to say about that. I'm told I need to take leave and return home, but I have no idea why I'm being sent home only to find an empty house. When I say empty, I mean entirely empty, including all of my clothes. Later, I learned through a neighbor that she had moved some guy into my home for 4 months, and that the word was that she was pregnant. It gets better. She stopped paying my vehicle payments and it was repossessed. She wiped out the bank accounts and maxed up the credit cards purchasing new housewares for her new abode. She would camp out at the ATM and wait for my salary to be deposited into my account before withdrawing all of the money but some change. I would have tried it, but the closest ATM was 5-7 miles away. I didn't have a vehicle, and it was winter in Kansas. Let me tell you, washing your clothes in the sink and drying them on the stair railing every day since you didn't have a washing machine or a dryer wasn't enjoyable. I had to beg for MRE from supplies since I didn't have any money to eat. She made sure of that. I saw her for about 10 minutes before leaving the military, and she decided to tell me she was having twins, which obviously weren't mine. And JAG doesn't give about the soldier, only the spouse, and even though she cheated, she was still entitled to my check, which she was taking. We're obviously divorced, and I left out a lot of the others she did, because if I put it all in this would be a novel. If you want to know, leave a comment and I'll respond later. Here's an update, as well as some of the more personal information I left out of the first article. When I returned to the United States and saw my empty home, something within me shattered, as I'm sure most of you can relate to, but I was also shell-shocked, PTSD, as we used to call it back then. I wasn't in touch with relatives at the time, so I had no communication with anybody other than the wife who had abandoned me. Friends believe me when I say that gazing at those quiet walls, hearing voices, and wanting to reply to them may put your sanity to the test. My commander suspected something was wrong since I had dropped from roughly 220 pounds to 170 in about a month owing to stress, a lack of food, a lack of sleep, and running 3 miles every night to drown out the voices in my brain. Prior to this, I hadn't actually talked to my ex-wife, and since I'd returned, I'd seen her about post-driving a vehicle she purchased in my name with a general power of attorney. I was at my lowest point, sitting in a psychiatric institution, psychologically and physically devastated and wanting nothing more than for it all to stop. Let me tell you, if you've ever gone to one of those locations, you know it's a whole other beast. I mean, you'll see stuff that make you wonder how terrible you actually have it. Don't get me wrong, my circumstance was terrible, but it could have been far worse. I got a visitor notification, and guess who it is? My ex-wife, who is 6 to 7 months pregnant and came to see if she could complete the job. You're not going to believe this, and I wouldn't have believed it if it hadn't happened to me. She told me everything. That she had moved him in 2 weeks after I was overseas, and that the affair had lasted a year. He was with me every time I went out on a field operation, and they had intended to depart as soon as I returned but felt it was best to be gone before I returned. At this time, I was fully crimson, and it took every ounce of mental power and control I had not to jump over the desk and smash both feet off in her cheating. I'm not sure what happened to me, but I got this insane calm and I suppose my poker face came out. I remember her expression going from smug nasty, "I hope you rot in here too," and I remember feeling like a passenger in my own body since I couldn't control my tongue at this point. "So is there anything I can point to here, or are you simply bored?" I said. "I'm taking the remainder of what you owe me," she said. "I didn't owe you anything that you hadn't already stolen." "What more can you take?" I replied. "You had my money, and now you have my freedom. And I have one question for you. What did I do to you that was so horrible that I deserved this?" Her response: "I wasn't pleased." That response confirmed in my mind that I wanted to get out of here as soon as possible, and as far away from her as possible. I stood up and announced, "I'm done," without saying anything else. I'm not proud of this phase, but it's what I needed to do. I spent the following month in every session providing the best performance of normal that I could. There were some setbacks, but for the most part, I nailed it. The reason I'm not proud of it is because I faked it 100%. 2 months later, I was freed. The damage had been done, and when I discovered how terrible I really was during the 2 months I was in the hospital, she had stopped taking all of my money and was leaving approximately $300 out of each check. It was, after all, better than nothing. I plunged severely into alcoholism and was wasting my little money on drink and going to strip clubs. I was absolutely out of control. I reasoned that because I had nothing to lose, I had nothing to lose. This went on for about 2.5 months of alcohol strippers and with Barrett's rats. Military members know what this is, until I got papers to process, and I remember asking the NOC on duty, "Since I get paid tomorrow, and I'm technically out of the Army today, do I have to pay my soon-to-be ex?" No. Oh my goodness, I was finally tossed a bone. I requested the earliest freaking trip possible, climbed on the aircraft, and saw KS shrink and shrink in the window, and it was the nicest feeling in the world. There's a whole other narrative in between, but I'll go straight to the point where she acquired hers. About 2 years later, I'm served with divorce papers. Yeah, I know I should have filed, and I'm sweating. Since we all know how this works for most guys, and I was dating my present wife at the time. So my father, my girlfriend, and I go down to the courthouse, and I see her there with a buddy, and I can feel the wrath and envy rise up in her eyes since my GF is an improvement in pretty much every aspect possible from her, and she knew it. We arrived at court, and everything seemed to be going as planned until the judge, another woman, saw that I was deployed and that there were children involved. When the ex hurriedly tried to rush past that the judge asked what the arrangement was, I said, "They aren't my children, Your Honor." She looked at her paperwork again, and then it all changed. Here comes the Enola folks. Reference to a bomb, a good friend of mine informed me that she had previously been married. So when I received the divorce papers, I drove into town to look up those records to discover when her absolute divorce from her first spouse occurred. And guess what? She was still legally married 4 days into our marriage, which was later annulled. The finest part was her appeal to the court that she was still married, to which the judge said, "That doesn't matter. You knew you were still married to your first spouse, and you still said yes. I'll see you again for polygamy." My ordeal was ended, and I strolled out of that courthouse as if nothing had happened. I had 10-pound balls and 5-pound underpants. I married my girlfriend 2 years later and had a son. We've been married for 10 years, and the last time my father saw my ex was at a bus stop with her 2 children. If you have any queries, please leave them in the comment section.